No, no problem. Got some folks to admit here. Okay, I think I got everybody. There we go.
Hey,
Hey,
thanks for.
Brad, you're here.
I really appreciate you doing this. This is awesome.
No problem. Hey, give me 1 second and make sure I'm streaming. So just hang on here a second so I can check, do a bit of a check here and make sure I'm actually getting out to the interwebs.
Right on.
Looks like it. Okay, cool. Um, okay, well, let me see. I got a couple more people here. We'll give just a little bit
Works.
more,
Go for
time.
Retro is now live.
Oh, how cute.
Streaming,
Um,
SD2IEC, tips, tricks, and Q&A.
cute. Let me make sure we've got everybody who wants to get on. There's probably folks that are going to be checking via Facebook or whatnot, so that's great. Let me move my mug here so that I'm not stuck behind the chat window. Let me see if we can do this. There we go. Okay. So, Brad, the floor is yours. So I thought I'd let you kind of start out and maybe tell me what you'd like to get out of the conversation this evening. I can fill in a lot of details, but I want to make sure I cover everything that you absolutely want to know.
Yeah, sure. So, like I said, I have one of these that I
Okay.
bought. Um, I am in the process. I've been told to get no bigger than a 16 gig card because anything bigger was too big, and that I had to format it to FAT 16 or 32. I'm sorry.
32. Well, you can do either one, but 32 is probably best.
Okay. So then the other thing that I don't ultimately was trying to find was the great thing about the internet, there's always more information than you need. And
Hmm.
sometimes that can be a big rabbit hole.
Right.
So I don't know, where do I download the firmware to
Hmm.
put on the card?
Okay.
Where do I get the file browser program so it works in my Commodore 64?
Hmm.
And is there anything else that I'm missing?
Well,
Because
always.
I've actually been able to plug it into the back of my C64. I see the lights on it. I
Okay.
understand what the forward, back, reset, all those buttons do.
Hmm.
It's very impressive looking, but I haven't been able to tap into it yet.
Okay. Well, then we'll start. Let me uh, let me keep an eye on the admit list here. But so um, obviously, for everybody joining or watching the micro IEC SD, I'll just give a little bit of history for it because some people may not kind of know where it came from. So there's really two projects to talk about. So if you'll give me just a minute, I'll kind of give you the backstory. Um, so
Absolutely.
I know that I think his first name is Jay, and I forget his last name, but there was an individual a number of years ago who made a SD card uh, uh, kind of drive emulator, much like this unit.
Forgive
Um,
me for plugging my file browser, NAV works great with UIEC.
Alan Reed's on there mentioning nav, so we'll talk about that as well. So Alan, remind me when we get to the file browser section, we can talk about that. In any event, and I'm going to do this real quick here. Give me 1 second. Um, so there was two devices, or one device that was started. It was called the 1541-3. So because there was a 1541-2, this was a little device called the 1541-3, and I believe it used a PIC chip, and it was either Jan or Jay was the person who developed the unit. And it was pretty rudimentary. It supported the standard IEC protocol that the Commodore has, and the unit, was available for sale. And then there was another individual who saw that and he wanted to add some features and whatnot. He found, I think the PIC chip was a little bit underwhelming from his perspective, and so he replatformed um, the uh, uh, the device and I think made a device called there. I think there was an intermediate device called the MMC2IEC because MMC was the early version of secure digital cards. Micro memory card, I think, is the definition of it. So anyway, there was 1541.3, and then there was another individual who I can't forget who created a follow-on product called MMC2IEC that used a Atmel AVR chip, and then Ingo Korb, who goes by the handle Unseen, he took that code base and started eventually kind of rewrote the whole thing to become what's called SD2IEC. So Secure Digital to IEC is the software or is the firmware of the device. And then along in the midst of all of that, I was working on trying to figure out how IDE drives worked. And I thought, well, I've got this Commodore 64 here, and so I don't want to tear up my IBM. So I've got some old IDE drives. I'll try and do something to connect an IDE drive up to a Commodore. And so I started writing some firmware using an Atmel AVR chip because it seemed like a good chip to use, and had the ID drive, and I started working on it, creating my own DOS. And along the way, I found out that Ingo Korb had already written SD2IEC, but it was designed for SD cards. And so I took his code and I modified his code so that it would work with IDE drives. And so I switched over to use the SD2IEC code base on my unit, but I called my unit micro IEC. So this is not the original unit. The original unit was an IDE and compact flash based unit called IDE or micro IEC / IDE. You see a few of them out in the market. And it was just a personal project. It wasn't something to build. It wasn't something to buy. It was just something I did because I wanted to know how the IEC protocol worked, and I wanted to know how the IDE drives work. I had a lot of people who were interested in it, and so I ended up developing it into a product, and I sold a few of those units. But at the same time, people were saying, "Hey, we really would like to have one that uses the SD card." Well, obviously, Ingo's code base already supported SD cards. So there was one other thing that was going on about that time. This was about the 2003, 2004 timeframe. And if you remember back at that time, some of you may or may not, but one of the things that came out on the market was an all-in-one Commodore 64 called the Commodore 64 Direct Tv Dtv, which was like one of those joystick games that had a complete Commodore 64 in the unit. It was designed by Jerry Ellsworth. I've got one of the units here. I don't know if you guys have ever seen one of those units, but so here's what they look like right here. Let me make sure that shows up in the camera. So hopefully folks have seen something like that. Basically a joystick that contains an entire Commodore 64. And so the IDE unit that I had developed wasn't going to fit in that, but Jerry had been gracious enough to figure out a way to hide an actual serial port, an IEC port in the unit. And so by soldering some wires to the printed circuit board, you could actually have a keyboard. There was a way to hook an IBM PC keyboard up to the unit, and there was a way to hook an IEC port for a disk drive up to the unit. And so I designed this unit right here, which I'll turn the computer off here so I can show you. So you can see the unit right here, which is, let me see if I can get it in front of the camera. So this is a very, very small unit. For a long time, I think this was the smallest SD2IEC based, drive emulation card that you could buy. I don't know if they've made any smaller at this point, but the unit was made that small because it was designed to be embedded in the Commodore 64 DTV. It turns out most people don't buy it for that reason, but that was the original goal. And then of course it has the SD2IEC firmware on it. So that's the real kind of quandary at times. People talk about SD2IEC and it can mean two different things. There is the SD2IEC firmware, which is Ingo Korb, or Unseen is his handle. He writes and maintains, and I'll show you in a little while. I'll show you in a little bit where that is. And then there are a number of devices on the market that are called SD2IEC capital letters, and those are devices like this. They're actual hardware. I decided to use a different name. I didn't like using the same name for the firmware and the device itself, but so that kind of gives you an idea of that. When people ask about SD2IC, they could be talking about the firmware, or they could be talking about the actual hardware. And so that's the reason. It's kind of they're somewhat interchangeable in most conversations because the firmware runs on the hardware, but sometimes you can get a little caught up in that. But but that's the unit, and the unit will actually run. So Brad, to your point, I do agree that 16 gig is probably a nice size for an SD card, but I wouldn't worry too much about it. Like if you're having trouble finding a 16 gig card and you find a 32 gig card or a 64 gig card or whatever. A number of years ago now, probably 10 years ago, I had somebody who contacted me and said, what's the biggest card that the SD that your this drive emulator can use? And at the time, a 128 gig SD card was the biggest one that was on the market at the time. And so I bought one. That was when they cost like $100 or whatever. Excuse me, I bought one and reformatted it. The bigger cards, the cards that are bigger than 32 gig, typically are formatted in a new format called exFAT. So it's X with FAT after it. And this device is not compatible with exFAT, but it's easily remedied because all you have to do is put the card into a Linux or a Windows machine or whatever and format it as FAT32, and then you're good to go. And FAT32 will handle drives into the minimum. I think FAT32 will handle a 2 terabyte drive, or maybe a little bigger. So we've got room before SD cards won't will be too big for them to be formatted FAT32. So all you got to do is find a card, make sure it's formatted at least at FAT32. The smaller cards, when those were more available, could be formatted as FAT16, but I don't really see any advantage to doing that nowadays. It doesn't really help the device, but it will support an old FAT16 card. So FAT32 is what you want the device to be formatted as, and I would say 8, 16, 32 is probably a sweet spot for cards, but whatever happens to be cheapest at your local tech location that you buy stuff from, or online retailer or whatever. I think the big thing is to get a reasonable quality card, because I know some of the real cheap cards they just barely support the standard. And the only thing those folks do when they build those cards is they test them in Windows to make sure they run. And if they run in Windows, they ship them. And so the device it has to, it has a little handshake that has to be done with the, with the card in order to enable reading files off the card. And sometimes that handshake, if it's not exactly like what Windows does, then the cards don't work. So SanDisk is a good one. No names are probably okay. They're not that expensive, so I just wouldn't spend too much time on it. If you buy a card and then it doesn't work, I would just go get another card real quick and just try it, because chances are the card's just not compatible. And we could see if we could make the card compatible, but typically it's that the company that makes those off-brand cards just doesn't adhere to the spec. And so part of it is, how much do you want to deviate from the spec just to make a cheap card work? So any questions?
No, that all makes sense so far.
Okay.
I did have one question, Jim.
Yeah, go ahead.
I have, admittedly, I have 3 of these things, and I use them religiously. And I love the fact that I can get more than 4 partitions out of it, which seems to be the status quo for most other manufacturers of these things. So I get a full 12 partitions. How is it that you're able to pull this off on these units and these other guys can't do that?
So that obviously, so we go back when Ingo started developing the firmware, the MMC to IEC device was already being built. It was kind of a hand-built device, and it used an AVR, Atmel AVR, and the specific chip it used was a Mega AT 32, which, as the name suggests, it has 32 kilobytes of flash ROM storage. So you can have a code, a firmware that's up to 32K. And the problem was when Ingo was putting in, and I'm probably ruining his name. I've never actually said his name out loud. So, but anyway, when he was working on the code base, he was trying to make the code fit the Mega 32 because the Mega 32 was a device that a lot of people had, and so they could load his firmware onto their existing device. Um, so as a result, that one of the things that goes along for the ride is if you look on the I guess if you look on Atmel's webpage, you'll see that the different um, Atmel devices have a certain amount of flash ROM, and then depending on how big a flash ROM it is, they have a certain amount of RAM. So I believe the Mega 32 only has 1K of RAM in the unit. And so every partition takes a certain amount of space to hold the partition information. And so there was a limit to how many partitions. Initially, the device didn't include partition support at all. So I don't want to like over, I guess, state my contribution to the firmware, but when when I was building my micro IEC IDE drive, one of the things I wanted a replacement for a CMD hard drive. And so I wanted partition support mainly because ID drives had partitions, right? That was normal for ID drives to have
It
partitions.
behaves very much like one. Yeah.
Yeah. And then the other thing I wanted is I wanted timestamps. I wanted the extended directories like the CMD hard drive has and the real-time clock capability and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
I wanted those functions. And then I wanted the subdirectory support that CMD hard drives and floppy drives have, the forward slashes and all that. So I contributed those changes to the firmware. And so that's why those functions even exist in the firmware at all, is because originally the target it was the ID drives. And so, as you know, the SD drives can also have partitions. And when I was building this unit, of course, I come from an electrical engineering background, and I know that you always put twice as much RAM and at least twice as much RAM and twice as much ROM in whatever device it is, because you're always going to add more features as you go on. And I took that a little further. I decided, because Ingo was already having trouble with 32K, and there was parts where he would build units, or he would build firmware for those M32 units, and he would leave out features because he was running up against the top end of the 32K. Really, they needed 64K, and I thought, you know what? If he's already, this was back in 2005 or so, if he's already running out of room with 32K and into the 64K, I probably ought to go with something even bigger than 64K. Well, so the chip that's on my units is a 128K unit. So it's got 128K of flash. And the nice thing that goes along with that is as you have more flash, you get more RAM. So on these units, you get 4K of RAM as opposed to 1K. And so that's why you're able to hold so many more partitions. And actually you can push the number of partitions up. I think we stopped at 12 because I didn't have an ID drive that had more than 12 partitions, I think, at the time. But you can recompile the firmware probably to get up to 20 or 25 partitions. But the big thing is you have to make sure that you're managing the limited amount of RAM. This whole thing runs with a very, very small amount of RAM. Obviously, we're all aware of small amounts of RAM because we use older computers, but 4K of RAM can go up in really quickly. So I think it's important to to keep an eye on that. But I think 12 is not the max. I mean, it's the max that's compiled in, but I believe you can change it to be more. And that's why I use a bigger chip that has more flash and more RAM capability.
Awesome. Thanks for
No problem. I'm gonna bring up chat here again. It was kind of interrupting me, and I was a little unclear of what was going on. Okay, so that is one piece. The piece that, so one of the things you asked, I'm going to go a little bit out of order. So Brad, you asked what other things you need. So you've got the unit, you've got this unit here. I assume you have an IEC cable, which is it looks like my keyboard or my video kind of conked out on me, but you got the IEC cable, I assume. And so the unit powers up and you got the red light and everything. And do you have a Commodore 64 or do you have a 128 or a VIC-20 or what kind of device do you have?
Yeah, the 64.
Okay.
Just the breadband.
Okay. So when you load up the unit, so my unit's a little bit different than other SD2IEC, so I'll give both answers. A lot of the SD2IEC units come with hardware switches for what device you want it to be. I didn't really want the hardware switches. For one, it cost more money and I wasn't sure where to put them. And like I said, this was designed to be mounted internally, so it really didn't seem to need switches. You can change the device number on it, but to keep it out of the road of most other units, I figured most people had a drive 8 already, like a 1541 drive, and they might have a drive 9. So when you buy one of these units, one of my units anyway, it defaults up to device 10. So if you want to load a directory, and hopefully you can see the screen right now, you would load the directory. So LOAD shift 2, which is quotes, $ quotes, comma 10. And that is, and then if you do the directory here, you'll see that's the files that are on the directory. So device number 10 is what it defaults to. You can change it to any device number you want from 8 to 30, I believe. I think 30 is the biggest number you can use on the IEC bus, but it can be any one of those numbers. But the unit when it comes out of the box is set to device 10. So chances are, if you do load quotes, $ quotes, comma 10, you'll get a directory. Okay. The one thing I would suggest, and understand this is a shameless plug, but you're under no obligation to get it from me, but using an SD2IEC device one of the neat features about the SD2IEC firmware is that it has Jiffy DOS capability built into it. So it understands the Jiffy DOS protocol. So instead of doing that load quotes $ whatever, you can just hit the F1 key and there's your directory, and you can also load files a lot faster, just by going up and like there's a D81 right there, but here's a D64 file. I'm not going to try and load it because you can't load D64 files, but you've got like this file right here, which is, so it's a 63 block file, and the Jiffy DOS protocol makes that load much more quickly than if you would do it with normal stock DOS routines. So I would highly encourage folks to get a Jiffy DOS chip. You can use a fast load cartridge, and it also supports fast load. So if you're not ready to break open your Commodore and replace the kernel, that's okay. You can use a fast load cartridge, but that'll take up your that takes up your expansion port, and so you won't have an opportunity to have as much stuff in the expansion port. You can get one of the expander thing and try to use flash load with something else, but it gets a little dicey. So if you're going to use the device a lot, I would recommend that you get Jiffy DOS. The other piece that you can, and it works with fast load and Jiffy DOS, but the nice thing is the DOS wedge command. So like right here, let me look right here. There's a sftest.d64, and so one of the things you can do is you can just @cd, whoops. So you can just do this. Whoops, I missed the F there. And I realize it's a little bit of extra typing, but it's a lot better than, I'll show you the alternative here. So what that did right there is it changed into a directory, right? The way that the firmware works is it treats images like D81 images, D64 images, and D71 images, and all that. And there's also CMD, FD, and HD images. It treats those as like a virtual directory, kind of like Windows treats a zip file. You know, you double click on a zip file and you know it's a collection of files, but you click on it and it brings it up in a file explorer window. Mac does similar things. And then if you if you do a directory on that, from where you are, you get the contents of the D64 file, which this one looks particularly boring, um, but if and then you can kind of go back to the root directory, which with the back arrow key here. So like I have, well, right here is a good one. So I'm not going to do this. I'm just going to do this. So just do an @cd:, and I'll just do C64 NIC. So for those of you who know that, I sell a NIC card, a network interface card for the Commodore. And so here are a whole bunch of programs that work with that network interface card. So that's the beauty of having a built-in what they call DOS wedge, is you don't have to do it the old way, which is this is the old way. Let me show you how to get into that directory. If you don't have Jiffy DOS or fast load, you have to do open 15, 10, 15, CD : C64 NIC star, and then you have to do : close 15, right? You have to do all that, and that gets old pretty quick. So so if you're looking for something to help your life out, $20 for a Jiffy DOS kernel replacement is I think a pretty cheap investment. I'll stop there for a second. Anybody have questions?
Yeah, you mentioned that you could actually have like CMD style images in there, like DHDs and D4Ms and stuff like that. Will it actually read that? Like, for example, I back up my CMD hard drive in these DCD images, and
yes, we absolutely, well, I don't know that I can take a ton of credit for it. I think I did some proof of concept code for that, but Ingo wrote an entire image capability that does, like I said, D64s, D71s, D81s, DMP, I think is the native. It's the native partition format for hard drives, and then I don't know what the FD4000 image.
D4M.
It is it? Okay, D4M.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure it'll do D2M and D4M, and DMP. It will not do. I don't believe it'll do. I think CMD floppy drives and hard drives had a partition format for CPM. I don't think it does that format, but it'll do the other formats. I know I've got a DMP image around here. I don't use them all that often, but I know I tested DMP images. And of course, it'll do directories within the DMP image. So you can have directories in the image, and then of course you CD into the directory, and then you can CD into a directory within the image. So, yep. Now, mind you, most people don't use the image. Most people don't use the CMD image formats, and so there's probably more bugs in those formats because there hasn't been as many bug reports. But they do exist. Yep. Okay. So I'm gonna switch to. I'm gonna see if I can switch here to show you my screen. So give me a second here, and I'll bring up. I will bring up my web browser here so I can show you. Another question you had was where to get the firmware. So let me bring that up here. Give me a second. Okay. Let's see.
Just to circle back to the SD size. I'm just playing around with a BMC64, and I tried to format out a 64 gig SD out to in FAT32, and it barked at me after the 32 meg limit.
Okay, what program were you using?
I was formatting it out in Windows.
Okay.
and I used the what was it? I used the DOS format to try to force it out that way,
Okay.
and then I tried the that SD Foundation, their formatter, and
Mm-hmm.
well, it wouldn't do FAT32. That's why I ended up using the DOS. But when I tried to go past 32, it barked at me, said no. You know, the max partition size was 32 megs on a FAT32.
Okay.
And
Well, that
and to
is.
be honest, I'm trying to remember what I've thrown into my onto the IEC drives.
Yep.
I don't think I've gone over that yet. I think I've been using like 8s and 16s because I got those on sale.
Uh-huh.
So this is like the first time I've used that large partition size. So FAT32 is the only one that the IEC drives take. They don't.
They don't. Well, there's FAT 12, which was used on the original floppy disks, right? And it has I forget what the size restriction was on it, but then there was FAT 16, which was the old drives that, if you remember the 540, I think 540 meg or whatever it was, yeah, 540 meg limit. And then there was FAT 32, which I believe is 2 terabyte. So FAT 32, and then the next one above FAT 32 is exFAT, which is a completely different format. So you can format a drive, I believe. I actually don't know that I've ever tested FAT 12, but I believe the code base supports FAT 12, which would be a really, really small drive. FAT 16 I know works because I've tried it, and FAT 32. So it does all 3 of those FAT formats. It won't do exFAT, but the formatter I use is a Windows program called GUI format, GUIFORMAT. And I know it worked on my 128 gig card because I just piped it in there and said, okay, this is a card and I want it at FAT32, make it happen. And it did not bark at me anyway.
Yeah, I'll have to try that because, I was under the impression when I looked it up, I thought it was nuts because I could have sworn I formatted larger drives.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And 32 is like a FAT32 or something because I've ran into that kind of compatibility thing where there's a lot of this kind of stuff that likes FAT32, doesn't like, any number of other formats. So.
Yep. No, fair enough. All right, I'm gonna try and make this a little bigger so that everybody can see it here. But so if you want to make sure that you have the newest firmware on the device, the place to go is SD2IEC.de. So, and what you want to do is you want to go to you can go to the nightlies, which are typically they're pretty stable. They haven't been updated. Well, it looks like they've been updated last year, so that's good. But they don't get updated all that often. They're usually just a few bug fixes. But what you would do is you would just grab this file right here. It says download binaries, and you would download this file. I'll go ahead and download a copy here.
Jim, what's the domain again that this screen view is a bit fuzzy. I can't make out the words.
Well, that's okay. It's SD2IEC, so the same name as the device. .de for, I believe DE is Germany, I think.
Thank you.
So don't quote me on that, but I believe it is. And then you'll get a okay, you can't see it here. Let me share another thing here so you can see it. Give me 1 second here so I can show you what I'm seeing. So window capture. Okay. Window, let's look at File Explorer. Okay. So here is File Explorer. So hopefully you can see that. Obviously it's a little fuzzy. Let me see if I can make it bigger. Nope. Looks like it's, bummer. Well, it's obviously not, it's the joys of streaming, right? But you'll see here that there are a whole bunch of different files on this directory, and they all have different sizes and whatnot. But the key is it doesn't matter. All you got to do is just take these files, and you don't have to do any. You don't have to pay any attention to what's in the zip file. All you do is you copy. Just take all these files and copy them to the root of an SD card, any SD card. Okay. In fact, we'll do that right now. So I'm going to take the card that we have out of the device I have. I'm gonna run back right here real quick so I can show you something. So let me get back to, whoops. That's true. I had one other thing here. There we go. So I'm going to show you one thing here. So if we shut the machine off, we turn it on. So we're rebooting the machine. There's a number of ways doing this, but this one's the easiest well, it would be if it would boot up here. Come on. Also, you're gonna be persnickety right in the middle of a demo. That's cute. And okay, so one of the things you can do is you can hit, if you have Jiffy DOS or you have a DOS wedge or something, you can do an @ sign when you first boot the unit up, and it will give you the nightly build number. So you can see right here I have 1.0, and then it's got these letters after it, and it's 2.4, blah 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 blah. So the ones that I just downloaded were 29. So this is 20. I have 24 on this unit, and so I'm gonna upgrade to 29. So what I'll do is I'll take the SD card out. I'm gonna put it in my computer here, and okay, and then I'm gonna copy these files onto. So I'll just show you here. I'll go back to that scene. So let me do one thing here. Let's see. Firefox. Okay. So this is where we were, and so I'm going to go to the directory. So my device or my SD card is on drive E. So I'm going to do E here. And so here's all those files that I just had on the device. And so it looks like I've got I've got a copy of the file here. So I'm not even going to worry about that. I'm going to leave that -24 file there, and I'm going to copy into this directory. So let me go grab those files that I just downloaded. Okay, give me 1 second here. And then you just take all the files, and you can do this, as often as you want. You take all the files and you just copy them onto the root of your SD card. So I just dumped them all right there. So there you go. So that's all the different files. Now those files are designed for all the different variations of SD2IEC units. And one of the files has it says, it's this one right here. It says micro IEC 3-M1281, because this device is actually the micro IEC version 3.0. So I'm going to take that card out of the unit, and I'm going to put it in here, and then I'm going to reboot the unit. And when I I'm going to go back so you can see what I'm going to show you. So pay attention here. I'm going to turn off my light here so you can see the LEDs really, really nice. So I'm going to turn the unit off, so it goes off, and I'm going to turn the unit on, and you'll see the red light come on, and then you'll see the green light, and it'll start, it's like it's changing brightness, right? Hopefully you could see that. Anybody see that?
Yeah, I see it.
Okay. So what it does is it looks through all the files in the directory. Okay, I'll turn the light back on here. It looks at all the files in the root directory, and it tries to find a file. Oh, hold on, I've got a couple folks here. There's a specific signature at the end of all of the files, and the signature has to match a specific signature that's built into the to the device. And so if it finds any of the files in there with that specific signature, then it knows that firmware is designed for this device. And then the second thing it does is there's a version string, and it looks at the version string of the firmware that's on the unit, and then it looks at the version string of the files that are on the card. And if the version string of the files on the card are newer than the one that's on the firmware, then it will automatically update the firmware. So it automatically takes care of that. All you have to do is just put it in there. And now, if you look at the screen and I hit the @ sign, you'll see that it's 29. So it's been updated from 24 to 29. So that's how you do the firmware update. So you don't even have to know about which file is the right file for your unit, because the unit takes care of that all on its own.
So what's that UIEC3 that's in that zip?
Yeah, in the zip is a file called UIEC3. And you can just copy that file onto the directory if you want to.
There's a UIEC and a UIEC3. So.
Yes, sorry. UIEC without the 3 is the original IDE unit. So that unit is still supported. And if you want to upgrade the firmware on it, you put the same set of zip file files onto the SD card on that unit, or onto, I guess it'd be a compact flash card in that case. Boot up that unit, and it will automatically update as well. It does the same. It's the same process.
Which and I guess which firmware is the best for? I'm always going to try to emulate CMD HD on these things because I use them specifically for the purpose of running BBSs.
Yep.
So, what would be the closest, most compatible firmware for that?
The newest one is just fine. So all of the units past version 0.83 support CMD hard drives and firmware. They don't. It doesn't. There's no capabilities that are taken away with newer firmwares. At this point, the firmware is mostly, I'd say, kind of in a maintenance mode. There's not a lot of additional features that are being added. So normally what you see here is, like we saw, the last update to the firmware was in 2021. And if you look at the source code directory, you can see there was a few bug fixes that were made, but no like missing functions or features for CMD support. So I think you're fine in going to 29. There is a way to go back. So if you go to 29 and you say, oh my gosh, there's problems, right? First of all, I would, you should, hopefully, maybe, you have maybe more than one unit. Try it on one unit, make sure it all works before you roll it out to everything, just like we do on all kinds of stuff. But if you get a device and it has 29 and you're like, oh, there was a bug that was introduced in the HD support and I need to go back to 24. 24 was working for me. There is a way to go back. And probably it's best to, chat with me or email me or whatever. I've not done it for a long time, but I think he's got a file out here that does it. So what you do is you put you have to put what's called a developer or a checked build onto the unit. So a checked build has a firmware version number of 0000. And so what will happen is there's special code in the bootloader that says, okay, do that whole thing that Jim was just talking about, where I check the device type and I check the version, and I only load versions that are newer than mine, except if I find a version that's 0000, go ahead and load it. And so what you can do is you can load essentially a 000 build, which you're not going to actually use. You're just trying to get the version number back to 0, and then clean off the files off of your SD card and put on your version 24 files, and then it will load the version 24 files. So that's how you do it. It's a two-step process. You go back to 0000, and then you come forward to whatever version it is that you want. So I mean, it could be a minor inconvenience, like, oh my goodness, there's a bug, I updated too far or whatever, and I need to file a bug report, but you can always go back to an older version of the firmware.
Yeah, I definitely keep a sandbox unit handy.
Yeah, so I obviously would do that. I mean, I would do that, and we did use, when the stuff was in heavy development, and I think, I can't remember, but I think initially there was no way to go backwards, and so we had to I think there was an update to the bootloader, and I know it works on these units because I've had to do that from time you think you got the newest code. This was years ago, but you think you got the newest code and it's fixed every bug, and then you load it up and you've totally trashed the bootloader, or totally trashed the firmware, and so you have to go back to an older version and figure out what you did was wrong. So that's how you do that. So anyway, um, that is how you get new firmware onto the unit. And right now, I normally ship with a firmware that I know is good. It's not the absolute newest one. I think the one I ship is like from 2020. So I'll try this 29. I don't necessarily keep the newest one because I figure when you get the unit, you can update if you wish to the newest one, because they do update about every 6 months or so. It looks like the last one's only been out. It's been out for a whole year, but before that there was like one every 6 months or so. So what I'm going to talk about. I know Alan's been talking about his browser called Nav, and if he's out there, I'm hoping he's still out there and he could put a link to the file browser so I can quickly find it. There's a bunch of them. There's FB64, there's CBM browser, there's a couple different ones, but I'll show you how to get at those. It's just going to the website and downloading them and putting them on the SD card, just like we did just a few minutes ago. But what other questions do people have?
Jim, on your the micro IECs, there's a clock or a position for a clock chip.
Yeah.
Have you ever populated that, or I've been looking at it at mine for like ages, and I've been very curious about it. And
so
is there any?
I mean, it is there, and you can populate it and use it. I kept, when I put the unit together, I laid out the footprint and I did the test units with the real-time clock. The battery and the crystal and the clock, added a little bit to the price and whatnot, and I just didn't get a lot of interest. Most people were just using this. There are people who, and maybe now I should retest the waters, because when I initially brought it out, this particular
https://csdb.dk/release/?ID=$115764.
Okay, thanks. So there wasn't a lot of interest in the real-time clock at the time, and so I didn't end up. I have these units. I don't manufacture themselves. I have them manufactured by a turnkey operation, and so I just left the parts off the unit. But you can put the parts on, and I guess if somebody wanted to kind of do two things, one is could test, which probably a lot of you can, but the other one, which is more important, is bug me on a regular basis to get, because I actually have the chip here. I don't have any of the units anymore. The one I had was a prototype unit, and I think I gave it away a long time ago, but I have the actual chips to populate and put the little battery on there and test it out and update the firmware to support it, because the firmware for a real-time clock is in there, but I think the main build for the micro IEC 3 has the real-time clock turned off. It has the firmware piece for that turned off. And so there's two things that need to happen. One is you have to put the chip on there and the battery and whatnot. Mm-hmm. And then the second one is I need to have Ingo turn on that field. It wouldn't hurt anything to have it turned on in the main build, but because there's not very many units with it on there, I had never done it previously.
What RTC does that call for, Jim?
I'm sorry, what?
What RTC does that call for?
Oh, you know what? I'll have to look it up. It's been so long. Let me see real quick here if I can. Let me step away from this computer and get to another one, because I can look at it real quick here. So why don't you guys ask another question while I look that up real quick? Anybody?
Oh, I've got several, but I mean, I'm trying to be. I'm trying to let everybody else go.
That's okay. Go ahead.
Well, so now I'm not a builder. I'm just a software guy. So when you say real time clock, I'm sitting here thinking the CMD style real time clock that provides file directory,
Yep.
time date stamps, and
Yep.
allows us.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yep.
So
That's
I keep
exactly it.
mine. I
Mhm.
run BBSs with them. I use the real time clock all the time, but I have to use the external power lead, and it's going into like a battery. So whenever the place browns out and the machines come back online, the CMD pseudo device still keeps its time, so that's helpful.
Yeah, and you're right. So I guess I should probably back up. There is a real-time clock capability built into the micro IEC already, but it is a soft real-time clock. So it runs and works as long as the unit is powered, but if the unit loses power, it goes away. So what you do if you want to use this, what they call, it's called the soft real-time clock actually in the device, you would power the unit up some way that it's powered all the time, and then you would go in and there's a program on CMD's um, their utilities disk or whatever. I think you can do it from BASIC. I forget how it's done exactly, but you actually set the clock to whatever time it is, and then until the unit loses power, it will have, within a certain amount of precision, I guess, it'll have the time that you need, and the date. And but the unit already supports that. So as you see on the screen right now, if you do what's called extended directory, most people don't know that exists, but if you do $T and you hit enter, you'll see that all the files have a a specific format. And so you've got 0505, which was when those files were done, 050521, and then they were uh, evidently put in the archive at 2:49 in the morning. So and then you see some of the other files that are in there as well. 08, or sorry, 0802. You don't see a year, although it does it will give you a year, but there's like an even more extended format of the directory, I believe, that does that. But this is the same format that CMD hard drives and floppy drives use. It mimics that same capability.
Hey, Jim, I just found it. You've got it. You've actually got it silk screened on the board. It's a DS
1307.
1307Z. Yep.
Yep.
So, and I found that chip, analog devices. So, yep. Okay.
So I'm gonna go ahead. I'm not gonna show you all the process because I think you all know how to go to a web browser. But I'm gonna go ahead and download Alan's nav program. So I'm gonna just go ahead and grab it here and put it on the unit here. Now, what typically I would do, and I think Alan can chime in, but what I normally would do is have a clean, freshly formatted card, and then put the nav program as the first file on the card, right? So it's going to be a little wonky here because it's not going to be the first file on the card, but but if you put the nav program as the first file on the card, then all you have to do when you boot up the machine is you just hit, like if you have Jiffy DOS, you can just hit Commodore run stop. It'll load the first program on the card, which ends up as your navigation utility, and then you have the file. This is a D64 image, so hold on here a second. I think I need to pull the program file out of the D64 image. So give me 1 second here so I can get this set up for everybody. For that, I usually use Durmaster to pull files out of D64 images. So, okay. Let me grab this file. So what other questions do you guys have that I can answer?
I was waiting. Okay, so I've noticed just a slight difference between the DOS in this, like for the purpose of using Jiffy DOS commands and moving files around and whatnot, I've noticed a slight variation in these units. And it's not just this unit, but I think it's any manufacturer that uses this firmware. It's not 100% CMD compliant. Like if I am moving, for example, if I'm copying file A to file B, and it's in partition 3, I have to put the partition 3 command on both the source and destination. I've noticed back in the day, we didn't used to have to do that. You would just put it on the head end and it would follow.
Well, I think that I mean, I think it would be good to send that in as a bug, as a, difference. I worked a while to try to get the files to be the same as, or to get the functionality to be the same as the CMD drives, but I didn't use, I mean, I use CMD drives, but I'm probably not the heaviest user of a CMD drive. So I think it should just document, and maybe an easy way to test the issue so that it can be fixed, and it'll be fixed. I don't think Ingo has a CMD drive, so I think he just fixes the bugs as people, as they know what, as they report them, he goes ahead and fixes the, whatever the bug is. So, but
is there a site for that or a address?
I would just email and then I can send it on to him. That's typically what I do, is just send him an email and say, hey, this looks like it's, it's a bug, and so we might want to fix it. Now, one of the things is you have to put it out there, and then you have to kind of play the waiting game, right? Because it's just whenever he gets a moment. There was a time back in the mid to late 2000s where I think he was finishing up his graduate degree, and he was, he had, I don't know, he seemed to have more time. I think now he's a professor, and I think his time is pretty limited. So, and I sometimes I can fix them. That one I might be able to fix, but I'll admit it's been a long time since I've mucked around in the code, and it's pretty complicated code. So it's probably best if we get him to make the fixes, as opposed to me trying to figure it out. So let me see. I've almost got this file down, so give me 1 second here. Here we go. So let me load nav96.prg, and let me rename it. Okay, so I got the file, and then let me put the little thing into our unit here. And it's hot swappable, so you don't have to worry about, shutting off the machine every time you do another one. So let's see here. So it's nav96. So nav96, and then, like I said, normally if you put this on the front of your card, then you'll have, so here you are. So now you can do this, and it will, if you have a D64 image, you can click on there and it'll show you what's in there. It looks like I was needing some Jumpman Jr. at some point in my travels.
Screen UI invites me to use the mouse. Can you use the mouse on that?
I don't know. I can grab a mouse here and see. Hold on a second. I have to find a mouse. I'm trying to remember where my mice are.
Leave it to me to give a rabbit hole question.
That's okay. It's one of the advantages.
Supports mouse and joystick.
Oh, well, there you go. So even if I can't find my mouse,
wow,
or my
that
mouse
NB 9.6 is nice.
All right, let me see here if I can get a mouse to work. No, let's not be that one. Oh, looks like my mouse isn't working. That's a bummer. Well, I'll take Alan's word for it that it does.
Mouse in number 1, joystick in number 2.
Okay, well, I definitely can do a joystick, but but you heard it there. So I have to find a mouse that works here because my smart mouse, evidently is causing issues, or having issues. But it does appear to work. And then there's, not to diminish Alan's program, but there is a couple other. FB64 is also an option, and I think there was. Oh man, trying to think. There's a couple of them, but if you do a search for them, there's a bunch of them. I think the big thing is to make sure that you put them at the front of your disk or your SD card, because that way when you boot up, you can just hit the Commodore run stop key if you have fast load or Jiffy DOS in, and then that makes it a little easier. You don't have to actually type it in and load it up. You can just get it going. And I think even there's some there might be some Jiffy DOS patches that you can apply and make your own kernel ROM that automatically loads the first file on disk. So that's a little extreme, but if you just got to have that, then that might be an option.
Do I need to change it from a D64 format or no?
Yeah, so what I did, that's what took me a little bit extra time. So it comes, when you download it, it comes as a D64 image, but that's not something you can load and run directly. So what I did was I used Durmaster, I think is the program. I'm sure there's other options, but I used, Durmaster. So I used Durmaster to just extract the nav 9.6 file out of that D64 image, and then I loaded it on the card, or I copied it to the card. So, Brad, what questions? We've covered some of them. I covered size of drives, how to get the firmware updated, where to get a file browser. What other questions did you have?
What was the name of the nav and where did you get it?
It's in it's not in the chat. So it is, if you go to Facebook, if you go to the Facebook Live, or you go to well, you can go to Twitch or whatever, anywhere where we're streaming, he's got the link in there. But it's called, if you just do a search for nav space v9.6.
Thanks for this, Jim. I was able to get my 2IEC updated quickly.
No problem. Okay. So if you just do a search for that, I just did a Google search for it, and it came up to the link, and it's right there. It's loaded up at the CSDB. I think that's what it is, right? Yeah, CSDB.dk, and the release number is 115764. So if you want to write that number down, that's fine too.
I just verified that
it's on CSDB.
The mouse does work. I don't usually use it with a mouse because I've usually got a joystick plugged in, but yeah, it works with a mouse.
Okay, good deal. Yeah, and which is kind of annoying because I have a 1351 mouse here somewhere, but I have a smart mouse.
That's great. It'll be a good conversation piece for when millennials come to visit.
Okay, so what else, Brad? Or what other? I want to make sure I get your questions answered.
I think you covered them, and you have a Jiffy DOS customer on the way.
That's fine. Well, store.goforretro.com, and the install guides are at jiffydos.com. So there you go. I should put a little thing up, but I'm not that professional, so you'll have to just take my word for it.
I'll take your word for it. And this is above and beyond what I honestly expected, Jim. So I really do appreciate it.
No, that's fine. It gives me a little bit of, I'll be honest, I used to write stuff up and try to stay away from videos, but it seems like the world is transitioning to video. So instead of being a get off my lawn kind of guy, I guess I need to learn how to do videos. So this is good practice. So what other questions do people have? Happy to answer questions, any and all questions.
As far as the firmware goes, I'm assuming you guys on the main branch aren't supporting LCDs displays, because I have one IEC, the SD2IEC, that has an LCD, but as far as I could tell, it didn't look like, this looks like somebody's branch, something that they did. It didn't look like it was supported in the main branch.
Yeah, that's true. Although I do remember that there was, I think if you go to, so you got to understand that in that directory, let me see if I can go back to it here real quick. Give me a second here. So we'll go to this directory here, which is the SD2IEC directory. So there is a, well, yeah, there is right up here at the top. So why is that? Oh, here, hold on a minute. I see I've created a problem here. Give me 1 second. I added this thing in and then forgot that. Okay, so in the top here, or in the top of this web page, there is a an interface to the actual source code repository. So this is the source code repository here. So so really, yeah, right here you can see that the only thing that changed, somebody was asking, what firmware is the best. The only thing that he changed between 2021-04-21, which was version 28 of the firmware, and 504 or whatever, which is the newest version of the firmware, he changed the config max partitions to be at least 4 in all the configs. At one point it was 2 in some of them, I remember. So he's put it in 4 in all the configs, and then of course for micro IC 1 and 3, it's set to be a larger number. So you're seeing it's not, there's not, it looks like actually wasn't much going on between 2018 and 2021. There's some swap lists, a hang when creating a fat name, header for file names ending in, I don't know what that is. So it doesn't change all that often, but it does look like it's changed a couple times in the last year. But in here, you can look through the source code. So you can go to the source code by clicking on this link right here. It says tree, and you can click on the source code link. And there is an LCD directory there, but it is, I don't know, I've never used the LCD portion. And I don't know how, I think the way that, so there's 2 ways that I saw the LCD was connected to the device. The way that Ingo had, oh, and I feel so bad. I should have asked him how his name's pronounced because I'm sure I'm butchering it. But anyway, the way that he had anticipated the LCD working is that there would be one computer system that would run the drive emulator, and there would be another smaller AVR that was connected to an LCD screen, and there would be what's called an I2C interface. That's a Philips 2-wire interface that connects the main microcontroller to that second microcontroller. But I remember, I know he built that out, and it's been a long time since I've seen the proof of concept of it working, but I remember seeing that working and it was fine. But I think I saw out there that somebody took a branch of the code base and they kind of pushed into the code base direct support for the LCD into the main into the main firmware. And I think Ingo was not too wild about doing that because he was afraid that updating, there's some of the code is pretty timing sensitive, and he was worried that if you did the LCD updates in the middle of your code, then you could fall out of time with whatever routines that you were working on. So I don't know if the version of the device that you have that has an LCD screen, I don't know if you can update it in exactly the same way and get the get the LCD capability from this set of firmware. You may have to go back to the manufacturer of your specific device.
I picked it up like ages ago, and it's like from Romania or Hungary or someplace, and I'm pretty sure it's one of the ones that snuck it into the stuffed it into the code as is.
Yep.
They went out of business
Oh,
a couple
bummer.
years ago. So yeah, I can kind of dig them up on archive.org and get the some of their older stuff. I think they have their firmware out there. But yeah, I was wondering if it was ever supported in basically the the main branch, because it didn't. The last when I looked, it didn't look like it. But of course,
Yep.
I don't touch that very often, because it's like one of those ones I don't dare update, because I'm sure I'll brick it or something.
Right. Yeah, that's a challenge. That's the reason I think, as I talked to folks, and probably as a public service announcement, there was a while there in the I don't know, maybe in the 2005 to 2008, maybe 9 timeframe, where there was only there wasn't much going on. There was the micro IEC, there was a Shadow Wolf had an SD2IEC device that was kind of a build your own device, and there was maybe 1 or 2 other people, and most of the other ones were build your own devices. And then all of a sudden, like as the turn, as the 2010s kind of rolled into focus, it seemed like there was a whole slew of there was a whole slew of these devices for for sale and on eBay or whatever. And so it was kind of interesting that for a while there were so many of these devices, and it was unclear as to um, you know who they are, and what kind of are they are they people that are that you're gonna hear from again ever, so there's a lot of those devices that showed up, and then they immediately disappeared. And
Yeah.
so I don't know where those devices are right now.
Yeah, there was. I picked up a number of years ago the UK 1541, which was kind of
Mm-hmm.
the predecessor to the Pi 1541.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a neat little widget, but it kind of it's not really super active development, and the Pi kind of overshadow it,
Mm-hmm.
because it essentially does the same thing. And if you're really looking for like the display is a kind of a neat little kind of gadgety function on the one that I have. It basically it doesn't do anything other than when you've got like a file list, you can see what changes over, and when you hit the button to switch the files, you can see what's on it. But otherwise, it's functionally useless.
Oh, got it.
The way the one that I have, the way they've implemented it. But
Mm-hmm.
I was always curious if they had done anything more with it, or if it was just one of those things that was, oh yeah, neat idea, but there really wasn't a whole lot of call for it.
Yep. No, I understand. Okay, what other questions are there? Anyone?